Top of the morning to ya. It is Monday, which means it is time for you to watch another weekly preview. And this time around, we've got some cool stuff in the spoilers section and a lot of hard decisions to make in the Soulforge this week. So let's jump on in to what's going on. So in the adventure board for everybody, Deeds of Ice, jump in, get them, figured I'd mention them, I'm a good guy, I got your back. In the chests for event keys, we've got Gor'Thrum troops, which is kind of a weird group. So if we check out what's in Gor'Thrum, we've got the option, and I'll do show all since I don't have one, we've got some weird stuff in here. So the mythics, unfortunately, are really not worth chasing, so I would not recommend going for either of these. However, there are some weird little utility troops. So Garnok's in here, who's kind of like the orc captain, so any kind of orc team that is ever going to be good will probably have Garnok in it. The reason for this is he's giving all orcs 50% mana start, and then he's also doing this gimmick where he's doing 1 damage to all of his own troops and then creating a mix of red and brown. So what this is really all about is that a lot of orc traits are triggered based on taking damage. You'll notice Gargantuar, for instance, gains 8 attack and magic when he takes damage. Shade of Thorn gains mana whenever he takes damage. So the whole idea between orc lineups is generally put Garnok on it and then put some of these other troops and then they do stuff. Unfortunately, they don't really do stuff, so I don't recommend really going crazy for orcs here. The only troops in here that are kind of interesting would be like Fists of Zorn, who's an empowered converter who makes skulls. This can be paired up with Web Spinner for a lot of annoying crap. Beyond all of that, that's kind of it. So I would probably not recommend opening up any event keys, unless you might want a Fist of Zorn if you don't have one for some reason. However, not really anything in here that's worth getting your panties in a bunch over. So I'd recommend skipping for that. In the event this time around, we've got the good old Tower of Doom. And what's interesting about the good old Tower of Doom is that we got a good old Tower of Doom weapon that's brand new. So if you jump into the shop, you can go up to tier 4 here, and then this gets us a new weapon called the Doomed Codex. So what's interesting about this is that this is a new type of doomed weapon. So previously we had a type that converted into Doom Skulls and did damage to all, then we had a type that would heal everybody and give mana. Now we have this new type, which is doing scatter damage and then doing extra scatter damage for every tempering level, and then it creates a mix of mana based on the amount of brown enemies. So this makes this weapon a lot less interesting than even probably the other ones. The problem with this is that this is very event specific, or maybe even, Guild Wars, like maybe, but not really. So what this is really only saying is that the amount of damage it's doing is pretty poor, the boost is pretty poor, but the mana mixing it's doing is only based on brown enemies, which is not something you can generally consistently depend upon. So if you ran this on defense, you could theoretically get some value out of this. However, this is not really all that compelling of a weapon. Even giving 3 magic to all allies if they have a Doom is not all that exciting either. That's not like a ton of magic. So unfortunately, I think this weapon kind of falls in the waste bin. I don't believe this is all that interesting, all that exciting. When you look into the upgrades for it, it also doesn't really get that much more exciting either. So unfortunately, the weapon, not necessarily the best. I always recommend getting them, of course, because it's here. You should grab it. You never know if it eventually will have some value. But as it stands now, there's nothing all that interesting about this weapon, unfortunately. As far as the team that I would recommend using this time around, I don't have to make a high and a low level version. This is actually fairly consistent for both. So this is the team I plan on running through. This is going to be using your Fang and then having Wrath and Dwarven Zombie and Diviner. So what's nice about this team is that you have a lot of mana generation because all 3 of these troops below them are mana converters. Dwarven Zombie will be turning greens into browns, and then Diviner will be turning anything you want into yellows, and then Wrath is turning turning blues into browns, and then yellows into skulls. So the 3 of these will actually work pretty nicely. The only bad thing about this team is that there's no empowered converter, so you'll have to work a little bit to get some of your mana, but then once you've got it, then you'll just flow and flow and flow and flow. So that should be a good time for everybody. Actually, as I'm looking at this, I want to do that. That looks better. So that team. This code will be in the description. Feel free to use that good old thing, but that's there for your enjoyment. And then beyond all of that, we get to look at the Soulforge. So I mentioned at the start of the video that the Soulforge is going to have some fun decisions for everybody, and this starts with this. So when we get to the Mythics, we actually have a bunch of like kind of high tier but not amazing kinds of Mythics. So Jotner, Yasmin, Voice of Orpheus, and Megavore are all worth considering. I would say in terms of like, you know, order of interest, at least for me personally, I would say Voice of Orpheus, then Megavore, then Jotner, then Yasmin's. However, all of these are all pretty cool. So Jotner is there if you're running a lot of giants. Jotner can bring a ton of synergy. He's giving barriers on 4/5s. He does a ton of true damage if you build a pure giant looping kind of lineup. There's amazing teams you can build with Jotner. I love Jotner. This is my Jotner PSA. I think he's great. However, I would probably not recommend most people use him. It's a very niche pick. It's a very keyline preference here, so I wouldn't recommend a bunch of people do this. However, Voice of Orpheus is somebody that you can build into tons of lineups, and that's because he passively cleanses everybody whenever you match any yellow gems, not a 4/5 match or anything like that, just any yellow. He's impervious, and he does a ton of damage whenever he does his shot here, so it's a 1-to-1 boost ratio of mana that you have, so this is really decent damage. You can do upwards of like 70 to 100 damage with this one shot, and then he gives mana to everybody, and he cleanses them all again, just in case you know this one didn't work. So Voice of Orpheus, somebody that's extremely versatile. He's also like an anime character here. He's so badass. Wow. Oh my god. So Voice of Orpheus is out there. He's divine and human, which means that Divine Ishbala can pair with him really nicely to give him an extra mana start. It's also Holy Saint Astra can also give him a boosted mana start. So there's ways you can get him moving even faster if you need to. And both of those teams are generally very yellow oriented. So this really leans on this as well. So Voice of Orpheus also really strong. I'd say of all of them, he's probably the most interesting one to craft in all of these. Megavore, however, is also in there, and he's kind of a staple troop in the sense that he has this awesome trait that just kills people on 4 or 5 matches 8% of the time. So that already is pretty cool. He's also impervious, so that's also pretty cool. And then he just destroys all the armor in the game. So every single troop that has any armor gets it all destroyed no matter how much they have the moment he casts his spell. And then he does a bunch of damage on top of that, and then he submerges himself. Another sneaky little thing about this that you may not know is that every single time you pump magic on Megavore, he's actually going to be doing 2 extra here. So if you're running the Dervish class, for instance, that's giving you +2 stats every 4 or 5 match to monsters, and he's a monster, then this will actually be going up by 4 every time you do this. So for each 1 magic, he's getting 2 benefit as far as the spell's concerned. This is because of the calculations that's being done on the back end. Megavore just happens to be one of the troops that gets a 2 times boost. So this is kind of crazy. It scales very, very nicely with Dervish class. So if you're missing some kind of raw damage source of some kind, this is pretty great. On Blue Guild Wars Day, he's also pretty great. So Megavore's out there as well. Again, I would probably recommend Voice of Orpheus if you don't have him. And then after that, admittedly, personally, I would probably say Jotner, but I would say generally recommend that Megavore would be after that. So yeah, enjoy that decision. That's not a good time for anybody. And then when we get to the weapons side of things, what is this? Oh wait, this one. Oh my god. It's Earth's Fury. So Earth's Fury, if you're not familiar, is destroying all the armor on a troop and then giving all of that armor on a 3-to-1 boost ratio to all of your troops. So what that means again is if that you just target somebody that has 100 armor, this will be giving 33 attack to everybody on your team. So this means you can kind of cast this off 2 or 3 times and then basically everyone on your team is hitting like a truck. So for events where you basically are able to kind of punch through, and kind of might lose a troop or 2, Earth's Fury is a pretty good option because this will give your entire team boosted attack so you can knock down people as you go through. So that's pretty darn cool. As far as an event weapon goes, this is generally considered a must-have because besides Mang, that is used pretty much in all teams as far as events are concerned, Earth's Fury is an alternate that you could be using. So I would recommend that you jump out there and grab an Earth's Fury for sure. Make sure you get one. Don't want to be the person without one. The other weapon is Spiked Mace, which is way less interesting, and the only reason this is less interesting is because Groshnak really has no troops that's worth talking about. So, unfortunately, not the best weapon. I would recommend you craft it just because anytime there's a mixed weapon, they're always potentially interesting. I feel like orcs amongst all troops are probably one of the troop types that are most in need of some kind of a buff. Both of their mythics are very poor. Their troops in general are very poor. So that makes this weapon seem super weak. But to me, that would also signal that to the developers, hopefully they're going to be giving them a buff at some point. So certainly don't craft this just because I think they're going to get a buff eventually, because of course they will, because they have to, please God. But that's out there as well. Probably worth saving your diamonds, at least at this point in time. There's no compelling reason to make this just yet. Unless you're a collector, then grab away. It's out there. But that covers everything in the normal game. Let's talk about spoilers for the rest of the week. For the spoilers section, on Tuesday, we are getting a faction assault. In case you didn't do enough faction assaulting over the weekend with your wild court action, I hope you had a great time with that. But we are going to be having Fang Moor. So Fang Moor is going to be on Tuesday. The team that I use for this is this one. I got this all the way up to 500 using this team. So this team may not be the fastest in the earlier levels, but certainly can scale and scale and scale. So feel free to use this team. Code will be in the description. On Wednesday, we are getting a new pet. It is the Crimson Batling. Look at it. It's so darn cute. And then on Thursday, we're getting a class event. And the class event is for probably a class that I wouldn't have told you was all that interesting until maybe now. So now the Necromancer class is still not all that interesting in terms of what it does and its traits. The talent tree isn't so awful, however. Getting access to the arcane tree means that we're going to get 20% spell reduction, means we're going to get 50% mana start. It's a stealthy class, so that's kind of fun. And then if you get it all the way up, you get a 7% chance to just straight kill people when you kill other people. So this is actually kind of interesting. And the main reason this is actually more interesting is literally because of this picture right here. So undead, and who's this guy? Oh yeah, this is the new mythic we all just got. So the Grey King is also undead, and there's weapons that can mix based on undead troops, and there's also weapons that can mix based on Keytar troops. So Necromancer, I still do not rate necessarily all that highly as far as a class. However, there are a lot more reasons now with the Grey King being so interesting, and there being both an undead mixed type and a Keytar mixed type weapon. So I would say start leveling up your Necromancer. It looks like undead are getting a lot more love these days, so I would recommend trying to get this guy up. Unfortunately, to get the most benefit out of this, you'd want it to get it to 100, so I'd say make a dent this week. Get it up, get it going. And then on Friday, we've got a new bounty event. So the bounty event troop that we're getting this time around is Werewolf. So Werewolf is kind of fun because he's going to be creating even more red. Well, this is a little strange in the sense that we now have had 2 troops in the very recent time frame that are making a lot of red mana during bounty events. So this is kind of okay because there's a lot of cool red troops, and personally the team that I like to fall back on once I get to the later levels, if I can't do it with a pure faction, involves a lot of red. So this troop is a pretty decent mana generator, not the worst thing on the planet. Make sure that when it comes to Friday that you're putting this troop in your lineup somewhere as ascended as possible. Every bounty event, the bounty captain will be giving you 2 times the benefit. So throwing them in there and having them fully ascended will give you a 12 times bonus just by having them in your lineup. So make sure you jump on in and do that. But that is everything for you guys. Let's go talk to our Switchy friends over there. Switch people, it is your time to see what's going on in Gems of War. So of course we have Deeds of Ice in the adventure board today, just so happens, so that's a friendly PSA just to keep you in the loop. As far as event keys for you guys this time around, we're getting the Divinian Fields, of course, since that's what the event's all about. And when we look at the Divinian Fields, there's not that many crazy cool troops in here, however there's some worth talking about. So Worldbreaker is the mythic, and he's a mythic that's kind of one note as far as what he does, but he is very fun. He does have a ton of mana cost, but he gives himself a random, 5 stat boost on some random stat whenever you do 4 or 5, so that can be fun, but generally what you want that to be going towards is magic. However, most of the time it won't. But then he blows up the whole board and does a bunch of damage to everybody. So this is kind of a fun troop, especially when you put him in a lineup with a Dragon Guard, for instance. You'll be magic pumping him constantly since he's a dragon type. I don't necessarily recommend chasing him with event keys, however. I do like him, I do like using him. However, he's not somebody that's generally recommended or used all too often. So I would say don't go chasing for World Breaker. Artema, I'll mention real quick, is probably just because it was a troop I used a lot in the early game. I leveled up using Bard. She is yellow. She also does decent amount of damage to 2 people boosted by centaurs. So, you know, not the worst troop on the planet. Running her in the front line is kind of fun. She does lots of cool scully stuff. So Artema is kind of fun if you're an early game player and you're looking for some kind of damage output. She's kind of fun to have. Other troops in here, early game again. Atlanta, very cool. She's doing damage to everybody. She doesn't have that much mana cost. She has a chance to just ignore armor when she does skull damage, and you get bonus yellow. So Atlanta, from an early game perspective, is a very useful troop. And beyond all of that, there's Ragnagord in here. So he's also a very useful troop because he starts with 50% mana. He gets 1 magic for each red ally, which is not really useful at all. However, he does explode the entire board. Basically, you get to pick the color to make sure it explodes as much stuff as possible. He is very useful, however, from a mana generator perspective, because you'll only need 7 mana to fill him, and this effect is pretty nice. So Ragnagord, also pretty cool, that's in there, worth talking about. And finally, Herdmaster, actually. So this is going to explode all the yellow gems on the board, basically, and then cleanse everybody. You also get bonus yellow mana by having him on your team. I probably wouldn't recommend running him in your first slot. However, Herdmaster, also very interesting. So there's a lot of very nice utility troops and useful troops in here from like an early to mid-game perspective. So if you're at all missing some of those troops I just talked about in your early to mid-game, maybe you would want to use those. However, for the most part, if you're an endgame type of player, there's nothing really in here besides potentially World Breaker that you would be interested in. And I couldn't really give a strong recommendation to be opening up event keys for that man. But that's what's in your event keys this time around. For the event this time around, you guys have a raid boss, so it's time to blow up some Zools. So what do we have to do with this Zool blowing up kind of thing? Well, they gave us a new troop. It is Nightwing. So if I type in the word night, clearly that wasn't enough text to get to the right guy. But Nightwing is here. And Nightwing is actually a pretty darn awesome troop for this whole thing. And the reason is, of course, because he does his normal, skull extra damage to bosses. He's stealthy, which is already kind of great. So this is going to protect him a little bit as you're going through this whole experience. But his spell is definitely the most interesting part. So damage to a boss, this is regular old plain stuff. However, this is creating 8 yellow and 8 purple gems every time you cast him. So from a mana generation perspective, that's really, really great. So the teams that you can put together using this guy is especially fun. If you remember, a lot of the troops that we were looking at were taking yellow mana, for instance. So I gave you 2 different teams you could potentially be using for this. For the higher level players, this is the team that I would probably run myself. So this is using a Mang up top with a Titan class for barriers when you need them. However, we're using Herdmaster to get some mana going, and then we have Nightwing to keep the mana going, and then we've got World Breaker just to be doing some extra damage to everybody else. So the amount of mana you're going to have when you run this team is going to be stupid. You'll basically never run out of mana. You'll potentially never give up your turn. So this is a very fun team that you can use to smash through. Alternatively, actually, this lower level team is something that you could totally be using as a higher level player as well, and it really just comes down to whether you'd want the Horse Lord in there, which is the other new troop, or if you would want to use World Breaker. So this is the exact same team composition that we talked about before. However, actually I like that better, so I'll switch the other team to that. What Horse Lord is doing is he's going to be dealing damage to somebody, but then pulling them up top. So what that actually means, and of course he starts with 50% mana, what that actually means is that in a raid boss scenario like this you're going to be able to take Zool from the bottom and yank him all the way up top. That can be fun or it can be totally scary, and that really depends. So if you have your Mang ready to go, so the way that these fights generally always work with a team like this is you get your mana for your Mang, you Mang Zool himself, and then at that point, if you wanted to, you could use Horse Lord to pull him up to the top. And then the next person you hit with a skull is going to be the boss. So that can be a very useful strategy. However, please remember that Zool takes every single mana type, so while he'll perfectly mana block everybody below him, what that also means is that every single mana match they make from then on is going straight into the boss, who can just instant kill you. So please make sure, if you do want to use the Horse Lord style, that you're pretty darn confident that you're going to be able to kill Zool very quickly after you do that. So this team is an option that you can be using. So both those teams will be available. As I mentioned, I will switch the order there because I think this makes actually more sense. So those teams are available and out there. This should actually be a very fun boss scenario. I actually like those teams a lot. That's just going to be a really fun thing to do. As far as the event weapon, so if you jump into the event shop that's available in here, you will be able to get yourself a new weapon once you get up a little bit, and that is the Rosebow. So Rosebow is going to be doing a mix of mana here, so it's doing blue and yellow. Unfortunately for this event specifically, I wouldn't really recommend using this one. This weapon isn't all that awful. You could use this instead of Mang if you wanted. However, you'd be putting all of your chips into the Nightwing basket from there, so I personally would say let's just run the Mang as usual. However, this is a very interesting weapon. The only thing holding this weapon back is that the Divinian Field's troops are not necessarily something you'll be using all that much. If you upgrade this all the way, there's really nothing all that interesting in here either. It makes a green, it destroys some greens, it does a little bit of damage, you get 1 magic. So the weapon in general, not necessarily the best. However, it's there. Make sure you grab it, because you never know if it'll be useful eventually. And then when we get to the Soulforge for you guys, so that's where things get a little complicated. So in the Soulforge, you've got Pharos Ra, and you have Elamogrum, if I can actually find him. You have Elamogrum, and then you have Gargantuar, or Gargantar, I get yelled at this, and then you have Arachnean Weaver. So of all of these mythics that I just mentioned, the two that I'm going to focus in on are Pharos and Arachnean Weaver. So I'll start with Arachnean Weaver. So Arachnean Weaver is somebody that's very great because they're impervious, which means that you can't really do any status effecty things to them, and they're stealthy, which means you can't really target them, which means they're super survivable as far as your lineup's concerned. When you kill an enemy, you'll summon a web spinner, which is an amazing troop that does triple skull damage every time it hits somebody. So this is super great. So in terms of the traits, this is already kind of sick. And then he webs everybody when you cast him and does true damage to the last 2. And then if you kill somebody, he explodes the board. So Arachnean Weaver's kind of this crazy troop is doing a lot of stuff. So if you're going to be using somebody like Arachnean Weaver, I strongly recommend you pair him with somebody else that does true damage first. You want to use Arachnean Weaver as a finishing kind of kill versus like just trying to be webbing people constantly. However, this amount of stuff that he can do is really, really great. So I think having an Arachnean Weaver in your lineup is super, super great. Of all the mythics that are in there, that is the one that I personally would recommend you'd want to be crafting. However, there is Mr. Pharos that I mentioned before, so he's giving you 150% bonus to souls from battle. What that means, of course, is that if you're trying to gain a lot of souls, then this is a very useful troop that you can potentially have. Having him in your lineup is going to allow you to get a lot of souls. So this is going to be transforming yellows to purples, so he takes purples himself, so that's kind of fun. But then he does damage boosted by his souls, and then he gains some souls. So teams that you generally use for soul farming will generally involve a dragon soul up top with an umber wolf on the bottom, and then 1 or 2 Pharoses in between the two of them. That's kind of the most efficient soul farming method that we have. I am going to give a slight, be careful comment here. So there is a 4.6 patch looming, and it does look like it's changing how we go about farming in general when it comes to the Explore mode. So I cannot in full confidence say that this is exactly going to work in the future. So if you want to hedge your bets, Arachnean Weaver would be the best cast. However, as far as soul gaining goes, Pharos Ra is still the best troop in the game. So feel free to get him if you are looking for some souls, and feel free to get Arachnean Weaver if you are looking for some cool troops. Otherwise, just save your diamonds for something else. But that is everything in the Soulforge. except for the weapon, before I run away. So there's, I don't actually have it myself, the shooting star weapon. So what this does is dispelling all the enemies. And what dispel means is that if they were barriered, then the barrier goes away. If they were enchanted, then the enchant goes away. So this will remove all positive effects that the other team's running. And then it does damage to one specific person and then eliminates half of their attack. So this is an interesting weapon. However, I can't necessarily say that this is something I would go out of my way to craft. If you're looking to dispel all enemies, there's troops that can do that, like Azora, for instance, or there's classes that can do that. Anyone that has the Guardian tree, for instance, when you get them to level 70, will have access to dispel all enemies on 4 or 5 matches. So dispelling all enemies is not compelling enough of an ability here. Doing this much damage is not all that compelling either, and halving their attack is, while useful, not necessarily the most crazy thing. So I wouldn't necessarily go crazy trying to craft this weapon personally, but it is out there if you want it. But that is everything in the regular game. Let's jump over to the spoilers. For the spoilers, we've got ourselves, on Tuesday, a Sea of Sorrows faction assault. So Sea of Sorrow, if you are at all interested, is basically a bunch of fish people. This is a team that you can absolutely use all the way up to level 500 if you so choose. So this team code will be in the description. It's using the brand new Mr. High King Iron Gut as well as the fairly new Possessed King. So this is a fairly high level team. However, this team will get you all the way to the end. So feel free to use that team to get your way through the Sea of Sorrows. On Wednesday, there's going to be a pet event, and that pet event is going to be for Penguin. He's a cute little blue dude, so feel free to go snag yourself a Penguin on Wednesday. On Thursday, there's a class event, and that class event is for Oracle. This is very thematic, of course, for the Divinion Fields. It is the class for that group of people. However, the class is fairly uninspired, so it's meant to be synergizing with centaurs. This isn't all that interesting. This could feel like it's interesting, however, depending on your enemy casting spells to magic pump yourself is not really that great. This kind of implies you're taking damage or letting the other team do stuff, so that's not all that cool. And then when we get to the talent trees, unfortunately the wind tree is pretty bad, the knowledge tree is also pretty bad, and the light tree is just pretty okay. So unfortunately, as far as a talent tree mix of things here, there's nothing all that compelling. So it's out there. There's not a lot of compelling centaurs to even try and build around, unfortunately, so Oracle class, not necessarily the most interesting, but it's the event, so make sure you jump in there and get yourself some Orby Orbs if you get all the way to the end. And then on Friday, it's going to be a bounty event, and with that, there's going to be a new bounty troop. So the bounty troop that we're going to be getting is the Plains Jumper, and he's actually a pretty fun one to have. So he starts with a bunch of mana, which is cool, so 75%. And then he destroys 8 gems whenever you cast him, and then he does 29 damage to the first person. So as far as mana generation goes, he's pretty nice to have in your lineup because he'll just help you get some mana moving at all. Doesn't take him all that much to get going in the first place. So this can be a pretty decent troop. Again, he does have the Bounty Hunter trait, and he is going to be the Bounty Captain for this bounty event. What Bounty Captain means is that you get double the bonus by having them in your team this week. So, of course, if you're running the bounty event, you want to be not only getting Plains Jumper, but getting him as highly ascended as you possibly can, and then making sure that you run him in your team. You will get the maximum amount of bounty bonus by having him in there. So that is coming in on Friday. And that is everything. So hooray, Switchy Pokes. That's everything going on for you guys. So that covers everything for everybody. Everyone's got some cool decisions to make in the Soulforge. Everyone's event this week is going to be pretty fun. And then ultimately on Friday, we all get that cool event that I mentioned in the spoilers section. So pretty cool week. As far as Key Lime content goes, there's another video I'll be posting later this week, which is all about Mythbusters. So it's going to be covering gems and skull-related myths as far as matching them, mechanics with troops. It's a pretty cool video. I definitely recommend checking it out. It's also going to be a lot shorter than my usual videos, so that should be kind of fun. And then, of course, 4.6 is right around the corner. They're already starting to tease it. I believe there's going to be a stream tonight, actually, to give you a preview of what's going on. So I would strongly recommend covering that. It is going to be tonight. And then, of course, my 1,000 subscriber stream is also right around the corner, where I plan on destroying my body for your viewing entertainment. It is quite possibly going to be this weekend, and that all really depends on how many subscribers I get between now and then. So if I am able to reach 1,000 subscribers, I'll plan to be doing that this weekend. However, if not, I'll probably be doing it the following weekend, unless my channel just explodes and nobody likes me anymore. But look forward to that as well. But that is everything, and I will talk to you guys in a future video. Peace!